The World Cup is over. We have a winner. I am going to show you the first tiebreak game between Baku Praggnanandhaa from India, the 18-year-old. Had a real breakthrough tournament here. And Magnus Carlsen. Carlsen has yet to win the World Cup. That's the major title he's failed so far to secure in classical chess. So let's see what happened. First tiebreak game, 25 minutes on the clock, plus 10 seconds increment per move. First two classical games were drawn, of course. Not very exciting games. Carlsen had food poisoning, so he was exhausted. And Pragg admitted that he too was very tired as well. It's been a very long tournament, and to maintain that kind of tension is really difficult over, well, basically a month. Very tough. It's a gioco piano. And we have, with this move from Pragg, a tight manoeuvring game. A4. White is gaining territory on the queen side. It's a slightly unusual move, but Pragg had played this earlier in the tournament, defeated David Navarra in a very tense game. Navarra had played h6 here. Carlsen doesn't bother with such trifling little pawn moves and instead plays the normal d6. Castle's now a5 from Carlsen, just fixing that pawn. Always a dilemma to know whether to match the a-pawn's advance and just fix it, or whether to let it run. I mean, the problem here with a5 is that this bishop can't retreat now after this one. So you're not quite obliged to exchange. You could leave the bishop there, but Carlsen exchanges, which of course changes the pawn structure, which changes strategy in the position. So white now has this open f-file, or semi-open f-file, I should say, which does give white the possibility to attack on the king side. So this is a major theme in this game. And, well, here it seems to me that to eliminate this bishop is the most sensible, just to play bishop e6. But Carlsen plays knight e7, bringing this knight around potentially just to shut things out on the king side. And as we'll see, in order to play this one as well. So Pragg went for it with knight h4. So opening the f-file, potentially bringing the knight to the outpost here. But this is already, could be quite serious. A little exchange sack. Carlsen plays c6. Now, as I said, this is a possibility. And queen h5. Carlsen must have just thought, well, I can block out the bishop, so it should be okay for black. And it probably is. But even that is worth considering for white. But Pragg didn't go for it. He played queen e1. It's the most sensible. There's no need to plunge in straight away. But that remains an option. d5, so that shuts out the bishop. Bishop b3 and queen d6. So the queen emerges and just supports that knight. That's quite important. Queen g3, but white has an initiative on the king side. This is what Pragg wants. Knight h5. Queen g5. g6. Well, this is a double-edged way of playing by Carlsen, because of course this creates some weaknesses here. And if the positions were to open up, this is quite tricky. Pragg leapt in with knight f5, which is kind of logical. You keep going, then the knight gets the outpost. In fact, the more subtle knight f3 is a more challenging move. So threatens the pawn. If f6, you could go queen h6. I mean, already this looks rather tricky for black with the king exposed. And white can potentially open up with d4. And queen h4 might be even better, because that keeps some pressure on that pawn on f6, and then d4 can come. Carlsen would be under serious pressure there with you know, the king somewhat exposed. So knight f5. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and king g7. Well, that looks more solid for black than the other line, because the king is now off the bishop's diagonal, and the king protects these squares. King h1 and queen f6, and because of the threat to take on f5, then Pragg exchanges queens correctly. But I'm sure that came as a relief to Carlsen. You know, there's not too much wrong with his position here. Pragg opens the f file and plays e4. So he wants to get this bishop working. And this is a pretty good piece, the bishop on b3. As it's not the bishop pair, it's perhaps not so serious, but still, Pragg is trying to make that one work. And Carlsen doesn't want to entertain these kind of possibilities, hitting that e5 pawn, so he exchanges on e4. But of course that opens up the bishop's diagonal. I mean, this is a very, very tense position still, even without the queens, because there is pressure here. Rook d8 threatens the knight. Rook f2 defends the knight. Yeah, and you've got to watch out for this pawn, of course, so the knight didn't want to move. Rook d4, classic play, hitting the outpost. But Pragg's pieces are very well coordinated. Hitting this one, there's pressure on f7. It is still uncomfortable for black, so Carlsen put the knight back. Support this one. c3 knocks the rook back, takes pressure off here. And that kind of relieves a bit of pressure, the rook going back. This knight can now move out of the way. Pragg played rook e2. He wants to be able to maneuver this knight to c4. Rook e7 protects that one. Preempting knight c4. Knight c4 looks like the move anyway, with a little bit of pressure. But Pragg went bishop c2. That looks a little bit funny to me, putting the bishop back. Nevertheless, this is still a very tense position. Knight d7, knight c4, good move. That hits lots of sensitive points in black's position. Rook a8 defends the pawn. And now Pragg really goes for it. He plays g4. Very double-edged move. Look at that f4 square. If a knight can land there, then that is a wonderful square. On the other hand, g4 sets in train, you know, this kingside pawn advance with g5, you know, fixing this one here and restricting the knights as well. So this is a really double-edged move. So Pragg really going for it. Carlsen played f6, and to me, that looks slightly odd. Perhaps I shouldn't be questioning the greatest player in the world, but it looks odd to me because it slightly opens the king. It makes it easier for white to open up a file. Knight f6 looks better to me, because if that attacks the pawn, and if g5, then knight h5 gets to that wonderful square, and if h3, then knight c5, and well, later on this knight could perhaps come to f4. I know it's slightly tricky because this one is attacked, but that looks logical to me. So yeah, f6 I found slightly strange. Rook g2, knight h6, and g5. So Pragg manages to open up the g file, and there are two pawns that are potentially vulnerable, potential targets. So this is a very interesting position for white. Knight f7 hits the rook. The rook came back. Rook g2. This is still very tricky indeed. By the way, the computer indicates that rook g3 is a better move. I mean, it's very subtle. But anyway, rook g2, there is still pressure. Rook d2 swings across. Well, at this point, I don't know. It feels like things are starting to... Things don't turn out so well for Pragg now. It seems to me that if White wants to get something from this position, maintaining pressure on the king side is the way to go. Perhaps rook d1 here. Hitting that one. And, you know, even later on, h4. I know this is difficult to get in. There's this rook coming across. But anyway, rook d2 played and rook f6. That's a nice move. Of course, rook takes knight. Allows that one. Here, I would have thought keeping the pieces on the board should be the way to go for White. I think that just maintains a bit of pressure. After the exchange, I think that makes life a lot easier for Black. These knights protect these squares, so there's no entry. The pressure is off Black's king. But Pragg had obviously decided that he wanted to set things in train on the queen side. And, of course, this is not a bad position for White. But Carlsen just starts to shore things up. King comes over to the d file and protects these squares, making sure there's no entry at all for the rook. a5, yeah, well, Pragg has made some progress here. Rook h8. But I'm not quite sure what White's plan is in this position. And you can see that, well, having advanced this g-pawn, you know, there are weak squares. In particular, that square on f4. And here we go. Well, rook e2, I think that's indicative of the fact that Pragg is running short of ideas. It's not a good square for the rook. But as I said, maybe there's no clear plan. This is the problem. And of course, Pragg was running short of time. Knight h5. Aha. Things start to turn in Carlsen's favour. That is a beautiful square. And that was always going to be the rebound when you play a move like g4. g4 is either very good or very bad, and it's starting to turn bad. Rook h3, the rook invades. Pragg trying to stir things up. He's looking for a plan. He's trying to get his pieces working. But it's no good. Rook c3. Hits the knight, which moves to a5. I mean, actually, things have just turned bad here. I mean, one could point out small improvements for White, but essentially, this is not good. Knight g5, the knight's moving in. Knight number 2 moves in. Wow, this is looking really, really dangerous. It's like a double octopus attacking the king and the rook and all these pieces. Rook c2. Oh yeah, instantly. Yeah, of course. If knight takes pawn, then it's fork time. Okay, so rook c2. Knight h3 check. And rook a3. And this is absolutely deadly. Hits the bishop and also threatens a deadly check on a1. A check. The king moved to safety on f6, and here Pragg resigned. That bishop is doomed, but there's also rook a1, and considering that the knights are covering these squares, that's a kind of back rank checkmate. Pragg resigned. Well, the last, let's say, 20 moves we saw Carlsen gradually working his way back into this game. But I mean, g4, you know, this is a critical moment in the game. It's certainly not a bad move, but it raises the stakes. I mean, it's great to see Pragg play with such ambition. But yeah, it's double-edged. And if we go back to this position, this is a key moment in the game. I think knight f3 would have left Carlsen with a very uncomfortable position, actually, because you see these pieces are yet to enter the game, but white is about to open up the position, and the king, a little bit exposed, could be in trouble. But Carlsen pulled through, and he becomes the winner of the FIDE World Cup. This is the only major classical trophy that he had thus far failed to win, and he's done it. And as he tweeted later on, chess, ? Complete. He's done it. And yeah, he shows no signs of wanting to really compete in classical chess much. He's certainly said that he's rather disenchanted with classical chess. If he is going to return to the World Championship, then it would really only be if there were faster time controls and more games, basically. Yeah. But he can tick this one off. He's won everything now, basically, in classical chess. But we have a new generation coming through. Praggnanandhaa, 18 years old. Absolutely fantastic, his achievements in the tournament. But we have other players. Well, Arjun Erigaisi, Gukesh, of course, as well. This is the new generation. I mean, there are others too, Abdas Torov. But it's going to be fascinating to see who emerges as the strongest of these players. Pragg reaches number 20 in the world in the life rating lists, and he will be a candidate next year. Good stuff. Thanks very much for watching. I should say thank you very much to Robert Riss, who filled in for me while I was away. I've been away for a few days again. It's that time of year. But normal situation will be restored on the channel. So look out for more videos coming soon. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks. Bye.